Okay, now that really starts to sound like exercise in a pill, mimicking the actual genetic instructions for exercise adaptation in muscle. But wait, the source material also pointed to another potential area, quite different from just mimicking exercise, didn't it?
That's right. There are these really intriguing findings suggesting potential anti-aging effects, particularly in the kidneys.
Anti-aging in the kidneys. Tell us about that research.
So the source references a study published in 2024 in the American Journal of Pathology. This study began with a really interesting observation.
What was that?
They found that the expression levels of these ERRs, these crucial metabolic regulators we've been talking about, naturally decline as kidneys get older. And they saw this both in human kidney tissue samples and in mouse models of aging.
Okay, so as kidneys age, they seem to lose some of the machinery needed for efficient energy management. That makes sense.
Precisely. So the study then asked, what happens if we treat aging mice with SLU-PP-332? Essentially, could boosting that declining ERR activity help?
And what did they find?
The results reported were actually quite striking. The treatment appeared to reverse specific hallmark age-related changes they observed in the mouse kidneys.
Reverse them, not just slow them down.
That's what the paper reported, yes. This included reversing mitochondrial dysfunction problems with the energy production in the kidney cells, reducing tubular inflammation.
Okay, inflammation in the filtering tubes.
Right, and also alleviating fibrotic changes. Fibrosis is basically like scarring or thickening of the tissue that often happens with age or kidney damage.
Wow. So in mice, at least, it seemed to actively roll back some key indicators of kidney aging, both structurally and functionally.
Yeah, the study's conclusion, as highlighted in our source, was that stimulating ERR activity pharmacologically, using compounds like SLU-PP-332, might represent a promising strategy to counteract age-related kidney decline and help restore metabolic balance within the aging kidney.
Okay, it's really easy to get carried away with excitement hearing all this, mimicking exercise effects, boosting metabolic health, and potentially reversing signs of organ aging, all shown in animal models.
It is exciting, and this is exactly the point where we have to pull back and really ground ourselves in the critical considerations and the, frankly, significant limitations that the source material rightly emphasizes.
Right.
While this preclinical data is genuinely fascinating, the current reality is miles away from having some kind of readily available therapy.
So what is the absolute biggest limitation we need to hammer home?
Without a doubt, it's the complete and utter lack of human data. Full stop.
No human studies at all.
None reported that validate these effects. Everything we've discussed, the metabolic benefits, the exercise mimicry, the kidney effects, it's all derived from studies in animals, mostly mice. Any discussion about whether it would work, or more importantly, be safe, in humans is, as the source clearly states, entirely speculative right now.
Okay. Zero proof it works or is safe in people. That's crystal clear. And we talked earlier about it being pan-agonist, but with a bias. Remind us about that.
Yes, the source notes that while it technically activates all three ERR types, alpha, beta, gamma, those ECR potency values we mentioned confirm it has that clear selectivity bias towards ERI.
The one that's high in muscle and kidney.
Exactly. So while it hits all three receptors, it hits alpha the hardest. That's relevant because ERI is so highly expressed in those key metabolic tissues.
Got it. Now, what about dosage? Sometimes you see figures floating around online for these kinds of research chemicals.
Yeah, and the source directly addresses this. It's a really crucial warning. Any dose figures you might stumble upon on internet forums or, experimental websites.
Like that 250 micrograms twice daily example mentioned.
Exactly like that. Those figures are completely anecdotal. They are not based on published, peer-reviewed scientific research or any clinical trials. And the document explicitly warns that they should not be taken as any sort of medically validated guidance.
That seems like a critical public health message. Taking dosing advice from random online sources for an untested research chemical sounds incredibly risky.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Which brings us squarely to safety. The source could not be clearer on this. No comprehensive toxicity studies for SLU-PP-332 currently exist in the public domain.
Wait, no studies specifically designed to figure out if it's toxic or what doses might cause harm?
Correct. At least none that have been published and peer-reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, any potential side effects in humans, any possible contraindications, like if you have certain health conditions already or any long-term risks associated with using this compound, are quite simply unknown.
Unknown risks. Okay. And what's its official status right now? Can a doctor prescribe it? Can you buy it legally for personal use?
No. The source material is unambiguous here. SLU-PP-332 is currently classified as an unapproved research chemical,
Research chemical, meaning,
meaning its use should be confined to strictly controlled, legitimate laboratory research settings. Using it outside of that context is considered highly experimental and potentially dangerous.
okay, so recapping that reality check. Amazing potential seen in animal models backed by detailed mechanisms,
Right.
but zero human validation for safety or effectiveness, no known safe dosage, unknown risks, and absolutely no regulatory approval. It's purely experimental.
That definitely brings the excitement back down to earth, doesn't it?
It does.
It's a compound that has shown genuinely fascinating promise in these very early stages of research. It points towards a potent way to target these key metabolic pathways. But it is absolutely not, by any stretch of the imagination, ready for clinical use or for anyone outside of research to be considering.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into SLU-PP-332, based on the material we reviewed, what's the overall summary? The potential versus the reality, and what's the suggested road ahead from here?
Well, the document summarizes SLU-PP-332 as potentially one of the most promising exercise mimetic compounds identified so far, primarily because of how potently it activates those ERR receptors, especially ERI.
Right.
It reiterates those key findings from the animal studies, the improvements in metabolic health markers, the enhancement of exercise performance, and that apparent reversal of age-related kidney changes in mice.
And always with that massive asterisk.
Absolutely. That enthusiasm has to be constantly tempered by the critical, absolute necessity for human data. Data on efficacy doesn't even work in people. And even more importantly, data on safety. Given its current status as an unapproved research chemical, safety is paramount.
Makes sense. So what are the next steps researchers are likely looking at according to the source?
The suggested future directions outlined are pretty logical. Firstly, advancing the research towards potential clinical trials, carefully designed studies to actually explore the effects of ERR agonists like this in humans.
Finally getting that human data.
Exactly. They also emphasize the critical need for comprehensive long-term safety and toxicology studies. We need to know the risks.
Of course.
And interestingly, the source also mentions exploring potential synergies. Like, how might these ERR agonists work together with things we already know are beneficial, like actual exercise or maybe caloric restriction?
Oh, that last point is really thought-provoking, isn't it? Maybe the future isn't about replacing exercise entirely,
Probably not.
but maybe finding something that could amplify its benefits or perhaps help people who, for whatever reason, really struggle to exercise consistently.
That's certainly the kind of question future research will need to tackle. But, only after those fundamental questions about safety and basic efficacy in humans are properly addressed through rigorous trials.
Yeah. Well, this deep dive into SLU-PP-332, guided by the source material we had, certainly highlights how cutting-edge research is tackling some really fundamental challenges in health and aging. It really makes you think, what does it truly mean for our understanding of health, disease, maybe even longevity, if we find ways to use pharmacology, to use medicines, to specifically target and maybe manipulate these core metabolic pathways like the ones controlled by ERRs? What could that imply for the future interplay between our lifestyle choices, medical interventions, and ultimately how long and how well we live?